Good morning, faithful listeners. You have tuned in to the P40 Ministries podcast, the one place where you can get a daily explanatory Bible reading to start your day strong. This is your host, Jen, bringing you a brand new episode out of Genesis. Hey, friends and faithful listeners, this is your host, Jen, with the P40 Ministries podcast. Thanks for tuning in this morning. We are in Genesis chapter 35, and we're going to be finishing out this chapter of the Bible. Now, I'm not going to talk too much before we begin here, so let's just go ahead and jump right in. And of course, I will be reading out the WEB version of the Bible this morning, but you don't have to. You can read out of whatever version you usually read out of, whatever that might be. Let me know what version of the Bible you read out of, by the way. I'm actually kind of curious to know what everybody actually reads out of. And my favorite version of the Bible, I think you already probably know this, but I love the NLT version. It's one of my favorites. I'm actually considering getting written permission from them to actually use their versions of the Bible on this podcast, but we'll see what happens with that, if that ever happens. But anyway, we will be reading out the WEB version this morning. And grab your cup of coffee. Let's go ahead and start reading. They, or Jacob and his family, traveled from Bethel. There was still some distance to come to Ephrath, and Rachel travailed. She had hard labor. When she was in hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, for now you will have another son." As her soul was departing, for she died, she named him Benoni, but his father named him Benjamin. Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, also called Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar on her grave. The same is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Israel traveled and spread his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. While Israel lived in that tent, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Padan Aram. Jacob came to Isaac his father, to Mamre, to Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac lived as foreigners. The days of Isaac were 180 years. Isaac gave up his spirit and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him. I actually realized that there's quite a lot of death in this chapter of the Bible. There's the death of Deborah, which was Rebekah's nurse, who was Jacob's mother's nurse. And we learned about that on Wednesday, but now Rachel, who was Jacob's favorite wife, has just died, and then also Isaac, Jacob's father, had died. It says here that Jacob and his family are now traveling from Bethel, and they came to Ephrath. Now, I don't know if this was pretty close to where Bethel was, or if Jacob had once again kind of ignored God about living in Bethel, because at the very beginning of Genesis chapter 35, in verse 1, it says, God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and live there." So I don't know if Ephrath was very close to Bethel and Jacob was just choosing that area of Bethel to live in, or if he ignored God once again. I don't know, and I couldn't find anything on that, so I'm not going to make any assumptions. But it says that when they were traveling to this Ephrath area, Rachel travailed and she had a hard labor. So once again, Rachel becomes pregnant. She ends up dying from this. It says in verse 17, when she was in hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, for now you will have another son." So this midwife was probably with Rachel during all of this longing she had for children and how she was trying to get more children out of her husband and had this weird relationship going on with her sister Leah about children, and they were almost in this competition together. So this midwife probably knew this and said, "Don't be afraid. You're going to have another son. This is good. This is a good thing." As Rachel is dying, she names her son Benoni, which is very interesting because Benoni actually means son of my trouble. So there was no more competition happening between Rachel and Leah anymore. Rachel and Leah were done with that. And Rachel names her child, because of the hard labor she was going through, the son of my trouble. So she wanted to live, and she did not want to have this horrible labor with this son. But Jacob ends up renaming him Benjamin after Rachel died. And Benjamin actually means son of my right hand. So kind of like my favored son is basically what Benjamin means. So he did not name the child Benoni, but rather Benjamin. And Rachel ends up dying, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, also called Bethlehem, by the way, which is where Jesus was born, was in Bethlehem. And Jacob sets up this pillar on her grave. And it says here that this is the same pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Now, obviously, this book was written many, many thousands of years ago. So I don't know if this pillar is still there to this day. It might be. I don't know. I didn't actually look that up, but that might be an interesting thing for me to research. But it says after this, Israel traveled, so Jacob traveled, and he spread his tent beyond the Tower of Eder, and he lived there in that land. And it says that he actually ended up living in the same area that his father and also his grandfather Abraham lived in. And this place was called Mamre, or I think I was calling it Mamer for a really long time. I think it's Mamre. And he ends up living in that area. So he did kind of follow God's instructions, which were to go back to the land of his fathers and live there, because he's legitimately doing that. So he's living in Mamre. But while they are settling there in Mamre, and after Rachel dies, Reuben, who was Jacob's or Israel's oldest son, ends up sleeping with Bilhah, who was one of Jacob's concubines. And I can't remember if Bilhah was Rachel's servant or Leah's servant, but it was one of the two servants. I think it was Rachel's. And Reuben, the eldest, ends up sleeping with this woman. It says Israel heard of it. Now later on, Israel ends up cursing Reuben because of this, because this was not a good thing to do. I mean, he never should have slept with her. So Israel ends up actually cursing him, or at least prophesying that the tribe of Reuben would eventually be cursed. So Reuben does get some punishment for what he did here with Bilhah, and this is kind of just mentioned very quickly. After this, to conclude, it says that Jacob had 12 sons. So we knew that, but they mention the sons of Jacob, and it says that they were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. So Reuben was Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon and Levi were the two that had went and killed that entire city that we had talked about a couple episodes ago. And Reuben was the one that just laid with Bilhah, his father's concubine. So these three boys, these three oldest boys, were actually some of the most messed up in this entire family. And Judah was kind of messed up as well. He was the fourth born. But Judah kind of goes through a transformation process, which is kind of interesting during Joseph's whole debacle, which we will learn about very, very quickly. But it's just kind of funny that Jacob's firstborn sons were some of the most messed up. And that's very possibly because of Jacob's own issues at this time in these young boys' lives before they become older. They see some of Jacob's worst issues, how he's a deceiver and how he loved Rachel more than their own mother Leah, and just all sorts of different issues and problems that are going on with that family. So those four sons were the sons of Leah. Now the sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin was his last born child. Then the sons of Bilhah, it does say it was Rachel's servant. I was right. And it was the same woman that Reuben had slept with. The sons of Bilhah were Dan and Naphtali, and then the sons of Zilpah, which was Leah's servant, was Gad and Asher. So all these women, these four women, had sons with Jacob. And then Leah had a daughter as well with Jacob, but she was not mentioned in these few verses. But after this, it says that Jacob came home to Isaac his father. It says that Isaac lived 180 years. So Isaac was old when Jacob had left all those years prior, probably 20 plus years ago Jacob had left. Isaac was now 180 years old, and he was still alive when Jacob had come to live in that area. And it says that Isaac gave up his spirit, so in other words, he died, and he was gathered to his people old and full of days. So he was very blessed, just as God had promised him he would be. And Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him. So his two sons buried him. They were back together. They were on friendly terms, and they ended up burying their old father. Esau, who had promised himself that he would kill Jacob after Isaac had died, and we talked about that a long time ago, is friendly with Jacob now. And I find that very interesting. So God redeems. He takes care of those who he promises he will take care of. And he is extremely merciful, even though there's so many problems with this family. I mean, even in this chapter alone, with Reuben laying with Bilhah, God is still so merciful and still so loving towards this family, even though there were so many problems and they were so messed up. So friends, this is the end of Genesis chapter 35. Join me on Monday at 6 a.m. or later than that. You don't have to get up at 6 a.m. and listen to these podcast episodes, but that is when they air. But join me anytime after 6 a.m. to discuss Genesis chapter 35, and this is all about Esau's descendants. So we're kind of done talking about Jacob for a little bit, and we're going to discuss Esau in the next chapter. And then after that is my favorite story in the entire Bible, and that is the story of Joseph. And I cannot wait to talk about that story. So there's definitely some exciting things to look forward to on the P40 Ministries podcast here. And I do want to thank everybody for not only tuning in, but also your patience with me. There's been a lot of promises I've been making that haven't been fulfilled yet, but they will be soon, I'm hoping. I do have to still make that beginning intro. I promised you guys I'd record something, and I will someday. I will get to it, I promise. But thank you guys just so much for how great you all have been, and your feedback. I do appreciate receiving messages and letting me know what I can fix or what you guys would like to hear in the future and all that good stuff. So continue sending me those messages. I'm still kind of on Facebook, not really, but I do receive your messages on Facebook. So you can keep sending me messages on there, or you can go to my website, www.p40ministries.com, and fill out a contact form, and I will definitely see that and respond to that as well. But guys, I've got nothing else to say except happy listening and God bless.